29th published fiction book that just came out called Morse Code. It's actually the third book in the Land, Sea, and Air series. So I'll read you the excerpt from the front of the book. This, like I said, is the third book in a series, so some of the characters were introduced in book 1 and book 2. So this is called Morse Code, and it's about twins, Dorothy and Dashiell, and they're called the Morse Code twins, Dot and Dash. Okay. The ground trembled beneath their feet, and Dot threw her arms around her brother. An earthquake, they had experienced those before. The shaking stopped as quickly as it started. Dash waited, and when the monkeys stopped their screeching, he exhaled. Papa continued with a chuckle. That was my next point. Remember, this area is prone to earthquakes. Stay in the clearing and away from the stones and pillars for your own safety. They can shift and crush you. Stones from the ancient pyramid and other buildings toppled over like children's wooden blocks surrounded them. Some of the massive blocks were covered with moss and pitted from the intense sun and unrelenting rainy season, and some were almost as tall as Dot. Dash could imagine one of those crushing him into a pancake. Dashiell remembered the shaking ground and trees from before. Did that mean the stories about the earthquake king were true? Father said old stories sometimes had an element of truth to them. The ancient people must have thought earthquakes were God's displeasure. Earthquakes and dangerous jungle animals, this was not the vacations his chums were enjoying. He exhaled and let his shoulders droop. Sure, Dash wanted adventure like the books he enjoyed from Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, but being mauled by a jungle cat wasn't one of them. How would Sir Doyle respond? He would use his quick wit and calculating mind to figure how to repel the dangerous beasts. Papa wasn't done speaking, and Dash could imagine his father standing before a packed audience of students, waiting to hear his tales of jungles, deserts, and pyramids around the world. One moment you see a bush you think that you recognize, and the next you see many such bushes. Stay close so we do not get separated again. Papa surveyed the surrounding area. Dashiell followed along, scanning their surroundings, crumbling old Mayan brick structures, thick undergrowth, a chorus of birds and monkey calls, and 3 incredibly dirty faces peeking from behind a tree. Who are those people? Dashiell pointed to the faces, and his family turned to look. Dorothy screamed and put her hand over her mouth, and the monkeys took up the screeches from high in the jungle canopy again. So, Morse Code.
My hiking guide, Urban Trails Reno, came out in October. Local writer and self-described eccentric Michael Branch once endearingly described northern Nevada as an alien place that looks like it wants to kill you all the time. He shared this observation with me in an interview 3 years after I reluctantly moved to Reno. The environment made me uncomfortable, so open, so dry, so close to defining the fragility of life. The closest suitable nature, I mistakenly thought, was somewhere in the Lake Tahoe Basin. With time pressing on each day, trips to Tahoe became less accessible. I needed a natural outlet closer to home. On one of my first local hikes, a journey on the southeastern flank of Peavine Mountain, I felt feverish in my rush over loose rocks to find some sort of silence, some sort of solitude. I craved the still calm of nature wrapping its arms around me, but the low brush did little to quell this. As I climbed higher and higher up the hill, past the landmark inn at Rancho San Rafael Regional Park, my resentment grew. Finally, I came to the top of the mountain and sat, delirious with want and frustration, on an outcrop of pointy red rock. I grumbled towards the wind as if my anger could stop it from pushing my hair into my eyes. As I sat there, I vowed to move to Oregon or Montana, someplace characterized by pine and water. After realizing the futility of reasoning with weather, I looked up to Mount Rose and across the cup of development to the Virginia Range. Clouds with seams of golden sunlight cast a glow over the scene that made me pause. After a few deep breaths, I noticed the kaleidoscope of red, browns, oranges, and pinks of the rock supporting me. The light, dusty sage in the foreground, a contrast that played against the colors of the rock. Each element of nature built upon itself right in front of my eyes. The wind blew the clouds into different orientation and the landscape changed again. New canyons within the mountain ranges stood forward. New folds across the hillsides revealed themselves. Like the darting of a common fence lizard, the sight felt impossible to hold on to, impossible to keep. The landscape around me demanded my attention. Moments spent elsewhere, looking at my phone, picking up my camera, turning to wrangle my dog, felt comparatively insignificant. As I walked back to the trailhead, my neighborhood in sight, I felt incredibly lucky and proud to live in such a place. All these years later, I pity the people who ask with judgment, "You still live in Reno?" Michael Branch advocates for this land through his writing, exposing the possibilities that are often overlooked in favor of softer places. The sheer vastness and starkness of this place attracted me and then worked on me slowly, over time, like wind on a rock, until I had no ambition greater than to make a life in these high, dry winds, he wrote in Rants from the Hill. I hope this book you hold now in your hands provides a similar inspiration to explore the hillsides and peaks that, from a distance, seem monotonous, exposed, and dreary. This guidebook details 42 trails, both natural and paved, with the neighborhoods and extending into open space surrounded by urban areas. I've intentionally excluded trails in the Lake Tahoe Basin, showcasing instead the beauty and variety of northern Nevada's high desert. If you find that a hike along Peavine doesn't suit you, don't be discouraged. Try another trail, a different time of day, or a different time of year. Explore when clouds are cast over the Sierra. Explore in time to see the sunset. Slow down and seek native wildflowers or migrating birds. There's not a single trail in this book I wouldn't happily return to, and many beyond the pages to explore.
Guess what it's about? Okay, and the first chapter, called Monday Dawn. Maggie loved Nevada best in the early morning, just as the dawn was about to waken, the sagebrush land spread below her. The sun had not yet peaked over the far range. The eagles and hawks were somnolent in their nests, and the air was crisp but still as it settled into her bones. In the last year, she'd seen more of her fair share of sunrises, as she was about to see another. She knew she was far from possessing a poetic or romantic heart of any sort, but she felt blessed in a way, receiving the gift of a new day, even if she was on a stakeout on a remote island with a name known only to map makers and Google. She resisted the urge to rub her frozen legs with a free hand, choosing the safety of non-movement over warmth. She didn't want to spook her prey, not just yet. Max whined a little at her side, and she dropped her hand to his ear, ruffling the fur. Almost, Mud, almost. Another minute or two. She sensed, rather than saw him settle himself onto his front paws, showing his usual infinite patience. She adjusted the rifle scope as she peered down the slope. She chose the spot well, giving her a straight-in view of the camp at the base a few hundred feet in the distance. 2 tents, a double and a single, on each side of the fire, trailing a thin line of smoke, white smoke into the air. A big black Chevy Tahoe parked near a worn to the bone white Ford Bronco with the original color lost under layers of mud and dirt. The Tahoe was shiny and unscratched, probably driven off the car lot this week, she guessed. 2 visitors at least, and their guide, a local, she decided. Aside from their presence just inside the border of federal land, the campfire is what aggravated her the most. These hills hadn't seen rain in a month, and normally she'd be sitting in a few inches of snow at this altitude in November. The Sierra Nevada mountains and its foothills to the west did an excellent job as acting as rain shadows for the inner part of the state. But Maggie was a lifelong Nevadan. She couldn't remember the less serious rain or snow to hit these parts. One spark and a bad wind could wipe out homes and for 10 square miles in an instant, and the wind always blew in Nevada. A second look and she sighed at the sight of a mature bighorn sheep roped onto the hood of the Tahoe, its tongue out of its mouth and pointing to the ground. She blinked and refocused, cursing softly. A female, not male, with the telltale softer curve of the horns at maybe 100 pounds. Killing a mother, any mother, grated on her, and most of the employees in her chosen field. The sun rose and peeked almost straight into her scope, causing her to blink and lose sight of the camp. No bother, she thought. Her informant was right as always, and his reliability had her sitting below the summit of a mountain that was probably had no name after a 3-mile hike through the brush in the dark, risking a twisted ankle or worse. She stood, satisfied the hunters were still in their tents and unaware they were being watched. Leaning her head back, she filled her lungs with the morning air and thanked whatever god or gods were responsible for giving her another beautiful sunrise and another day of life. She bent and ruffled Max's ears again. Okay, we're done. Let's go quiet. The sheepdog Labrador Heinz 57 mix popped up to his feet and trotted away with Maggie in his wake a little slower. Her bad knee was growling again, like it always did when it got cold, and she cursed herself for not taking an Advil before hitting the road. Their trail was well worn, but not only by two-legged creatures. The paw print near her were a few yards back were days old, she judged, but no worries. She had the best mountain lion detector in the world sitting next to her. The other good news was her bended collarbone was barking a little too, maybe a sign of approaching low front. Yeah, I wrote this. Snow, please, she praised. She prayed. The hike back to her wheels was faster than leaving it, the sun being a friend for the moment. Most often it was her adversary, along with the heat it brought. Maggie was not quite 30, but the hours spent outside under the sun and in zero humidity prematurely aged her skin. She wasn't so vain to worry about the lines around her eyes, but knew her father would see them and would worry. She smirked a little. Her father worried about everything. She traveled light as was her habit through life. Having spent decades hiding through tall sagebrush, Maggie learned along the way to wear boots with zippers, pants with tight cuffs, flexible leather gloves, and a coat that fell to her hips. Her tool belt, as she called it, was locked in her Jeep. Her Glock in a case under her seat, also locked. She muttered a curse at her cowboy hat, one of the two required symbols of office. The new one didn't fit right, no matter what she did or how she arranged her thick auburn hair, and the damn thing fell off every time she jumped across a dry gutter. Given a choice, she'd give it to Max to tear to pieces, but she had to wear it to remind people who she was and what she represented. In less time than some would have guessed, Maggie and Max crested one last small hill and found her Jeep where she left it. Like the older version at the base of the mountain, her official wheels were caked with mud, though this mud came from a call that was weeks in the past. She wiped the debris from the door, revealing the star underneath before she unlocked it. She donned her tool belt, then retrieved her Glock from under the seat, taking a second to make sure there was a round in the chamber with the safety in place. After a few seconds of contemplation, she donned a second holster, this one for the taser, followed by pinning the second symbol of office to her chest over her heart. She mentally ran down the list of gear on her body and in the Jeep, satisfied with the outcome before climbing in the driver's seat and starting the engine. She smiled to herself as she always did when she would drop the clutch into gear. Speaking to no one in particular, she whispered, "Sheriff Maggie Doan of Jefferson County, Nevada, is on the clock."
JoJo Riley here. This is my newest novel, released just in December this month. If you're seeing this in December, it's brand new. I'm just going to do, the opening chapter is very short, so I'm going to read from my little printout here. 1963. Later, details of their fight would sharpen and fall into sequence. But just now, Lolly's mind seemed filled with jumbled images. The knife in Russell's hand, the long wait for daybreak, his cry of pain, the fireplace poker, the blood on her blouse. She had made it to Salt Lake City, where the driver of the Greyhound bus announced a stop for the night. Passengers could travel north in the morning or continue west. Back in Gilead, she'd faced that old dilemma of choosing safety versus doing what the nuns had taught, turn the other cheek. This time she had chosen safety, thus her flight by Greyhound. Hopefully, Utah was far enough removed from Oklahoma that Russell could not intercept her in the morning when she reboarded. She rechecked the locks on her motel door, then washed at the sink, leaving her bra in place with its extra layer of medical cotton inside the right cup. Only a little blood had seeped through. Taking up her trusty pint of Old Granddad, she knelt beside the double bed and swallowed a mouthful. A calming golden heat flared in the core of her and worked its way outward as she concentrated on a habit learned in childhood. During truly rocky times, she practiced simple prayers grounded in those early years of Catholicism and a bit of her own Bible study. She'd never had a prayer directly answered, but the notion of God remained attractive for its suggestion that events seemingly beyond control were actually part of some greater plan. Plenty of subjects deserved prayer. For instance, President Kennedy's quest for an answer to the threat of communism, and for America to win the space race. Plus, children were always starving somewhere in the world. But in the cone of light spilling from the motel bathroom, Lolly asked forgiveness for detouring from the "till death to us part" portion of her wedding vows. There was no death because he hadn't killed her and she hadn't killed him. But their fight had damaged her dedication to keeping her marriage intact, and that itself felt like a type of death. Switching prayer gears, she once more acknowledged having failed her childhood friend, Norma Jean Baker, a subject as familiar as the moon. It had been a winter's night when Lolly scrambled through the orphanage to save herself instead of summoning help for Norma Jean. A child's innocent mistake, but weighted with such gravity that she carried it to this day, thinking of it often, and a detail mentioned by the bus driver penetrated her thoughts. He'd said that tomorrow's route would pass through Reno, the location of Norma Jean's last movie, The Misfits. That movie had capped her old friend's unsettled march through marriages and divorces, triumphs and failures. Through the haze of shock surrounding her current situation, Lolly's hopes rose a little. She had harbored no particular plan when boarding the Greyhound out of Gilead. Lacking her own vehicle, it had seemed the best way to put some distance between herself and Russell. Now, though, she saw that she needn't only remove herself from her husband's violence, she could seek out the last location linked to the one person who had loved her like a sister and whom she had loved the exact same way. Norma Jean's death last year, in August of '62, had rocked the world and dashed forever the slim to none odds of Lolly reconnecting with her, a daydream Lolly had nurtured for years. What remained was her hope that Norma Jean had found a final resting place worthy of her gentle soul. Now she dared to imagine that if heaven was indeed eternal, clues about those who reached it might leave a starry trail of crumbs to be noticed by someone searching for them. She could be that searcher, and finding that trail would ease the guilt she had carried all these years. With nothing much to lose and so much to gain, what harm could there be in spending a little effort on following the remains of a daydream that had once seemed plausible? She made up her mind. Call me crazy, but Reno, here I come. Warmed by her newfound purpose, no purchases there. Warmed by her newfound purpose, she stashed her bourbon and crawled beneath the faded sheets and tufted bedspread. When she lay back, her pillow flattened with a sigh, as if it too had waited a long, long time. After sleeping fitfully through all the highway noise and voices on the street, Lolly rose early to stand outside Salt Lake City's interstate bus depot until it opened to admit passengers. At the black and white counter, she paid for a day's transport to Nevada. Taking her ticket from the agent, she felt a prick of pleasure that her goal was a town famous for its Heroin Club or Bust signs dotting the highways of Middle America. She opened her mind to the notion that Reno held an answer to her old friend's ultimate fate. Optimism and a $20 fare would get her there. Her journey west resumed, Lolly dozed, largely oblivious to various stops and starts and a light snow falling along the Nevada's eastern border. Outside, miles of sagebrush and greasewood lay buried beneath a thick white crust. Along came the majestic Ruby Mountains, and later, frosty alkali flats in the middle of what looked a lot like nowhere. After a couple of stops in small desert towns, the bus topped a low hill and descended into the open palm of snow-capped mountains. Dead ahead, under a blue sky, lay the jeweled valley that was Reno. From its center stretched threads of twinkling lights that made it look not too large, nor too small, perhaps just the right size for people to conduct a bit of personal business without anyone paying them much mind. Lolly sure hoped so. The mud-spattered coach swung wide through a series of streets before shuddering to a stop alongside a cinder-block building. A bit wobbly from the extended confinement, Lolly stepped down into the chilly night air. Cases in hand, she hailed a taxi and asked the driver to show her to the main drag on the way to the closest bargain motel. Circling round to Virginia Street, the cabbie mentioned recent rains falling on high elevation snowpack and a day's worth of flooding around town. Then he cruised past a slew of buildings sporting neon signs that glittered like multicolored stars tethered to the streets. Lolly had always viewed stars as mysterious, hopeful objects, blinking across distances too deep to fathom, yet here was a place that captured their likenesses in its plate glass windows. Catching her eye in his mirror, the driver spoke. "How about them apples?" Lolly nodded. She could count on 2 fingers the things she knew about Reno, its reputation for fast living, and the thousands of divorces granted each year. That last detail had not escaped her, but she was reluctant to examine the state of her marriage. She wasn't proud about her flight from Gilead and the reasons for it, but she shoved thoughts about that episode into a corner of her mind. She had crossed 3 states for a cause more heartwarming than the current state of her marriage, a cause connected to the gentlest person of her life, Norma Jean. Her old friend's effervescent spirit seemed apparent among these flickering, dancing lights. The effect steadied her. "Is it always like this?" she asked the cabbie. "Always lit up like there's no tomorrow?" "You bet," came the reply. "The better to see what you're after." Lolly allowed herself a smile. She had come to the right place.
She adjusted her scarf, which protected her face from a frigid wind scented with the hint of coming snow. When she reached into her oversized purse, she double-checked the parcels inside. Her boss wouldn't appreciate her losing the rare books, since most of them cost a pretty penny. As a bonus, for her at least, the 19th century volumes might also help fill gaps in her research. Not only did deep dives into history provide her general insight into the past, but she also hoped learning more about the area might help shed light on a few mysteries she'd come across. And at her age, thinking of the future was full of appeal. Stumbling over the rough wooden walkway, she glanced into a nearby saloon as she righted herself. The rowdy patrons continued to enjoy their evening without having noted her klutziness. She envied them her freedom. Most of the time was spent either at her job or home caring for her elderly mother. Not that she minded. She'd long ago come to terms with the path her life had taken and gave thanks each day for her sole remaining parent. The weight of responsibility just wore her out so much that at the end of a long day, She often thought of nothing but dinner, a hot shower, and her cozy recliner. Her life sometimes felt as cold and dark as a winter night in Virginia City. As she stepped off the curb, her bangs blew into her eyes. A solid object knocked her flat on her ass, and the wooden sidewalk vibrated with the impact. Her teeth snapped shut on the tip of her tongue, and she looked up with watering eyes to find a shadowy male figure looming over her. Where the hell did he come from? Leaning closer, he held out a hand. "I'm so sorry. Are you hurt?" A wave of irritation washed over her as she recognized his voice. She ignored his attempt to help her, turned over onto her hands and knees, and winced as a jagged splinter pierced sensitive flesh through her worn jeans. "Only my ego." Her entire body ached from the fall. "Clumsy fool," she said under her breath while retrieving her belongings. "You're right." The man cast a nervous glance over at a dark storefront across the way. "Something distracted me, but that's no excuse. I should pay closer attention." Clapping a layer of dust from her new winter gloves hurt her sore palms. So much for trying to be careful. Watching where you're going is always a good idea. "I'm Nicholas Sampson." He offered his hand again. "Nico to my friends." "I know." Despite her normal inclination toward politeness, she found it difficult to be nice just then. Cocking her head, she tried to make out the man's features in the dim streetlights. Though she'd heard a lot about him, she hadn't yet seen him in person. "You don't look Greek." "You're right, my family's European, not Mediterranean." "Guess I can't cross being bowled over by Adonis off my bucket list just then yet." Her feeble attempt at humor fell flat even to her own ears. Not that she cared what he thought, since she hoped they would never cross paths again. Interacting with a handsome local celebrity was not on her bingo card, especially after the humiliating circumstances under which they met.